Okay, everybody, I'm really excited to talk to Brian Banks today. He's got a new project called Out of the Books. But before that, he's worked with so many people: Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, Steven Spielberg, David Bowie. He's doing commercials for AT&T and Anheuser-Busch. So he's got a lot of wisdom he could drop on us, and I'm really excited to talk to you, Brian. How's it going?
It's going great. It's a beautiful day here in sunny Southern California.
Yeah, it really is. Where in Los Angeles are you? Or
Up
are you in Los?
Yes, I am. Up in the hills in Los Feliz. It's lovely.
Beautiful. Love Los Feliz. How do you say Los Feliz? I feel I have this conversation.
I say Los Feliz.
Yeah.
Most people up here say Los Feliz.
Yeah.
You don't get a lot of Los Feliz or any of those. Those are people that usually don't live here.
I hear. Yeah, because that's how you would read it in Spanish.
It's like
but it's
Los Angeles.
Exactly.
That's how it gets said.
So a few friends of mine who live there say Los Feliz, which is a funny way of saying it too. But that's how I've started saying it. But Los Feliz. Yeah.
Anyway. It's a funny thing because I mean the Spanish that's become anglicized in Los Angeles is a whole game in and of itself.
Yeah.
I'm from here. I didn't come here to become a rich and famous musician. I'm actually third generation LA. And it's funny how sometimes, because I don't speak Spanish and I make no claims about speaking Spanish, but when you hear native Spanish speakers speak the names of the places, it comes out completely different. But the people that are English first language tend to say it in a certain way. And that's kind of how I did it, because that's how I grew up.
It's like Los Angeles specific Spanglish, kind of.
Yeah, it is.
So I was listening and kind of reading about your new project, Out of the Books, and I think it's an awesome idea and something that I think parents and kids can really get behind. So I'm interested in hearing about that. But I know you've had a huge career before that. How'd you get into music to begin with?
It was a real, it couldn't have been any more natural. My mother's a pianist, and a good one. My grandmother was a piano teacher. So music was always in the house. And I have this vague remembrance about when I was about five years old. My mom was playing and I was sitting in the living room. She was playing the piano, practicing, whatever. And I said something to the effect, can you show me how to do that? And so she sat me down and started teaching me. And then my grandmother taught me a little bit. And then one thing led to the other. And then I started, getting formal lessons from outside teachers. But it was just always in the house. I mean, the piano has been a fixture since day one. I mean, my mother, she's 88 and she still plays a couple hours a day. I mean, it's life. Music is life.
That's great. I mean, it's probably a good way to just keep your mind healthy too, because piano is multi-dimensional. You're doing multiple things at once, and it forces your attention on something.
Yeah, and music in general. I mean, the educators and the researchers have found this time and time again. People who do music, their brains develop differently, and your creative instincts are better. Your remembering is better, and I mean, we can jump to this later if we talk about commercials and stuff. But music is the best way, really, to almost remember anything. Yeah. All I have to do is go da-dum, da-dum, and you say Jaws.
Yeah.
But if I picked a random line from the middle of Jaws someplace, you'd go, why? What? Music just communicates so much in such a short, concise amount of time, and it sticks so hard. You remember songs. You may not remember all the words, but you remember the tune. You remember the beat. Not to belittle lyrics, because they're vital, and they give meaning to the song ultimately. But there's something about melody and harmony and beat that just sticks.
Yeah. I was just joking around with my fiance yesterday, but in all seriousness, I was telling her I've had songs that are been stuck in my head for like decades. You know what I mean? Like songs that like I'll
Please
just
sing something
hum
else.
for like 10, like 5-10 years will just be stuck in my head randomly and will appear like every few weeks or something like that. There must be something to that. Like, they say like smell is one of the strongest senses
Yeah.
connected to memory. There must be something about music as well. And
It certainly is for me. And I know that in talking to, educators and other people who are, on other sides of this sort of brain function thing than I am, that that music definitely stimulates and exercises parts of the brain that doesn't happen otherwise. And so if you've got it, and I think it does sort of strengthen the whole thing as I
yeah.
stammer and stutter to find the words that I'm trying to create here.
There's this video I saw it a couple years ago, and it's like one of those videos that just kind of makes you misty-eyed because it's so amazing. But it's this guy, he's really getting along in age, and he's really is the mental decline is really showing. I think if I remember it correctly, he can barely talk. He just kind of sits there and stares at a wall all day. But they brought one of his old musician buddies. I guess he used to be a really great musician, and they brought one of his musician buddies over, and they start playing music. And then all of a sudden you see his face just light up, and it's just like, it makes you want to cry when you watch it. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's the ultimate communicator, and it crosses cultures and it crosses languages. I mean, even if I don't understand the music of a given culture that I may not have been brought up with or studied much, I know when I've gone to foreign countries and I've heard music that I may not have ever heard before, in not a very long period of time, you start to really, you find the beauty and you find the communication, and you can just feel the emotion of what's going on, even if you can't understand a word. I've been to India and Bali and places like this where I don't speak the language, and you hear the music that is so foreign to anything that I grew up with. Certainly, I mean, you'll hear it now because we're such a multicultural and multimedia existence. But and hearing these things live the first time is just mind-blowing, and you realize that all you need is notes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all have the same notes regardless of the culture. Different scales are prevalent in different cultures, but yeah, it's so strange because obviously, like language, music was something that as a species we had to create or develop, or you think that, but maybe there's something more to it, because you watch a toddler hear music and they just start moving like innately. There's something innate about it.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, and I've read a little bit about this, so it's not just the world according to Brian. All cultures have art and music. Well, if all cultures have art and music, it must be a requirement. It must be part of our DNA.
Yeah.
Because it's not accidental. I mean, it's not like you find it in 37% of cultures that they have art and music, and another 60% doesn't, and 2% has a little bit of scribblage. Everybody has art and music, and it can be widely and vastly different, but it's there. And it's from cave paintings and scratchings on the walls. I mean, it's something that's in our DNA. And without getting too socio-political about it, as the arts keep getting squished out of education and out of the schools, I think that they're doing a great disservice to everybody, because it's not just culture, it's not just music, it's not just art. It's, I'd argue it's what makes life worth living. All these people who want to cut those things out, well, take them off of their beautiful sofa, take them out of their beautifully architecturally designed houses, take them, no more music, no more paintings on the walls. Everything is just flat and gray. And there's, all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of important.
Yeah.
Kind of rely on this.
That's a really interesting point, to point to certain things that appear in every single culture, regardless of the time and place. because there's other things besides art and music that, so it's interesting to look at things that way, that those things may be innate to human beings if you see them appearing everywhere. I mean, there's could have a conversation about a lot of different things.
Oh, well, I mean, it's it's one of the biggest topics of conversation today, certainly in the Western world, which has had, such a white dominant factor over the last several hundred years or 1,000 years, that really we are all the same, and we've got to get over this, well, we do it different or we do it better thing.
Right.
Because it doesn't exist.
Right.
Everybody we're all people. We all have the same urges. We all want to, protect and raise our children, and we want to be loved, and we want to love other people, and we want to have a good time, and we want to be, well looked at. We want to be able to do what we want to do, and not. Most people don't want to hurt other people. I mean,
yeah.
And I just find the whole. I mean, I wish it wasn't a topic. It is a topic. But I wish it wasn't a topic, but there it is. And you're right. Music, art, but all urges, really, they're just human.
Yeah. It's interesting because you could take that conversation in a million different ways. All different hierarchies that you see pop up in different cultures. Religion's another one that you just see across the board. Like it's really cool. It's a cool thing to kind of think deeply about. But in particular, music and art, like you said, it's cool that you just see that in every culture, regardless.
Yeah.
So you see your parents playing some piano and your grandma, and they're helping you out, and then you start getting formal lessons. So was that kind of your favorite go-to instrument? You started on the piano, and
I started on the piano when I was 5 years old, and got a pretty legit upbringing, classical piano all the way through university. Got my degree, and for about a year and a half, my folks, they bought me a guitar. And much to my disappointment in myself today, I played around with it and took some lessons for about a year and a half. And maybe I was just too egocentric about the piano at the time. And I really wish now that, if I had to do over, I would do it over. And I probably should take the time to do it now. But I could never figure out why I should waste two hands to make one silly note when I can play 10 on the piano. I mean, it was transactional like that. I mean, it was like, this is too much work to just get a note out. I'm just going to stay with the piano. I like that. And I lament that, because guitar is one of my favorite instruments to write for, to play with. Guitarists have had an incredible influence on the music that I've written over the years. And I wish I had learned to play it. And yes, of course, I could start tomorrow, and life gets in the way, but I didn't. But yeah, it's always been piano and anything with keys.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you went from your classical training to thinking, hey, maybe I could pursue this after my schooling.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because there's a lot of randomness and a lot of luck and a lot of serendipity that just happens in people's lives. When I was with a really fine piano teacher and a guy named Lou Morey all the way through the end of high school, like for about 6 or 8 years. And when I was going off to college, we'd done one more. He had recitals for all of his students once or twice a year. And at the end of one of those recitals, he took a tape recording, a 1/4-inch reel-to-reel tape, because that's what it was, and recorded me a copy of Wendy, now Walter Carlos, now Wendy Carlos, Switched on Bach, which was a synthesizer arrangements of a bunch of Bach. And it was and the most amazing album. And I think it was, and might even still be, the largest selling classical album of all time, but it certainly was for several decades. And it's a brilliant album. And I'd never heard these sounds before, this big Moog analog plug in. And I was really intrigued by that, because I always had a good brain for math. I was going to be a doctor, or something. You know, I had a good math science brain, and music was supposed to be a good hobby, and it'll be there for you, Brian, but you know, you should. And but when I was about 11th grade, I chose music. I said, I can't do both.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got this record, and I played it and played it and played it and played it. And it was like the most amazing thing. So I started to find out about synthesizers. I took a extension course at UCLA on synthesizers because the only thing I could find, and I did that and was like, oh, this is just mind blowing. So I started to get into that, and then I got a job selling pianos at, totally again by happenstance, at this amazing store called David Abel Pianos, which was from the late 50s until the, probably the late 90s or early 90s, I guess, early 90s. It was the piano store for every star. I mean, I cannot tell you the rogues gallery of 8x10 glossies my boss had on his wall. I mean, everything from, from Frank Sinatra to John Williams.
Where was that?
It was right on Beverly Boulevard.
Okay.
Right on Beverly Boulevard. In fact,
Cool.
if you're on Beverly Boulevard, it's a pet hotel, but the old neon sign that says used Steinways is still there, and it's fantastic. It's one of those great old LA neon signs. Anyway, cool. I met everybody and their brother at that store, and it was again one of those great serendipity luck boosts to my career, and I found out about music for television, which I didn't know anything about, and music for ads, which I didn't know anything about, and that, composing versus playing and arranging and all these things that I really didn't, because I met all these guys. I met John Williams there. I met Giorgio Moroder there. I met, just insane, and then all the bands came through, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac. I mean, Tom Waits came through. I mean, everybody came through that store. That was where you went to get a piano. And there was a section that we had that was all synthesizers. Now, we're talking the late 70s now. Synthesizers were not on every street corner at Guitar Center. They were a really esoteric thing. And there was another guy there, the other salesman, who was like one of the 2 or 3 top synthesists in Los Angeles in the studios, a guy named Clark Spangler, who was a salesman there. And he gave me lessons. I got lessons on synthesizer 5 days a week for 5 years from one of the top guys just by being there. I mean, it was crazy.
And you were getting paid. So.
And I was getting paid.
Yeah.
So that gave me an incredible boost.
Yeah.
And again, luck, serendipity, whatever you want to call it, these things always happen. And so I started to find out about all these other things. And that's what stimulated me to sort of move away from just being, but focusing on performance and really focusing on composition and production. And so, I started doing sessions as a synthesist, and that's where I started, in my earlier days working on some of the records that you mentioned, with Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson on Thriller and albums like that.
How did that come about? Were you doing sessions for somebody else, maybe a smaller artist, and then through the grapevine they're like, Quincy, here's that hey, do you want to play on this record?
Yeah. There was a computer synthesizer. It was developed out of Dartmouth, really, called the Synclavir, which in the 80s, 81, 82, 83 was just starting to come out. It was extortionately expensive, like $40,000 to get a decent thing.
Oh my gosh.
And it was very esoteric. Nobody knew how to use it. It used a technology that nobody was familiar with called FM synthesis, which is now out there in every synthesizer that you buy, but it was really cutting edge at the time. And I'm reading white papers from Bell Labs and stuff by this Dr. John Chowning, who invented this thing. And to be able to understand this. And I actually became the Southern California rep for this company for a while, selling their stuff. After I had left selling pianos at Abel's and tried to go off on my own and be a musician, God forbid, I took this as a sort of side gig because it gave me access to this incredibly powerful instrument that I couldn't afford.
Wow. It's a good
And I started
idea.
taking it around on sessions and selling it. And I sold one to this guy named Tom Baylor, who was Quincy Jones's vocal arranger for decades. And Tom and I had worked on a lot of stuff together, and he knew that I was the guy on this. And so when Tom was interested in buying one of these things, he came to me and says, is this really good? Is it worth doing? I said, yeah, it's great. You should come. And he checked it out. I sold it to him. He bought it. He takes it over to Quincy, who's just starting to work on Thriller. And he said, this is like the greatest thing. And Quincy heard it and loved the sounds, which were unheard of sounds in synthesis up till that point, and said, yeah, I want this all over the record. This is going to be great. At which point Tom realized that he was out of his depth, because he only bought this thing and couldn't really be a crackerjack programmer to come up with all these great sounds.
Yeah.
For Quincy. So he called me up and says, you want to work on Michael's album? He's working on a new album. It's like, well, yeah, okay. Because I did session work. Remember, we weren't working on Thriller, the biggest album of all time. We were working on Michael's next record.
Yeah.
Nobody knew it was going to be Thriller.
Yeah.
Right? And so me and my partner at the time, music partner at the time, we went in and we worked for, 3 or 4 weeks programming synthesizer sounds. A lot of that stuff, most of the stuff was played by Greg Fillinganes, one of the great keyboard players around. And he was he did almost all the keyboard playing on that record. But we were creating sounds, because in those days there was a little delineation between those who made the sounds and those who played the sounds. I did both, but he was Quincy's guy, so that was that.
Yeah.
So we did all this stuff, but so it was that, it's like one guy heard of the next, and then so we got it. But the most obvious and key sound that everybody watching this broadcast will know is the opening notes to Beat It. Those huge clang, 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 clang.
Yeah.
The stock sound.
Wow.
On the Synclavir.
Stock, but
not only stock, but here's something that a lot of people don't want you to know. There was a demo record, a Synclavir demo record. It was blue translucent vinyl. It's very cool. That exact lick is on the demo record.
Oh, wow.
Now, I don't know if they lifted it
or
if they just replayed it because it was a stock sound. But that exact lick is the opening to Beat It.
Wow.
Note for note. And but that's like the key. That's one of the most recognizable Synclavir sounds on the record, because there it is all by itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the value of getting technology or sounds, or being the first person to adopt. Nowadays, you'd think maybe more program like, or even synth sometimes. But if you're the first to get it, it doesn't matter if it's stock. You get to, if you put it out and you got a hit like Thriller, then now you own that sound, and anyone else who uses it is copying you. Not
exactly. Exactly. No, it's what do they say? Possession is 9/10 of the law, or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
So anyway, but I mean, that was an amazing experience to be a fly on the wall, while that process was going on, and the musicians that came through while we were working, and it was an amazing experience.
And then so you went on to work on with people like David Bowie and Rob Reiner and Spielberg. And so these were, I would love to hear what some of your, because I just thinking about Spielberg movies, what specifically did you do with him? Because I know some of the sound in his movies are awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because what we did it was in the color purple, and again, it was through Quincy, because Quincy Jones was the composer and also the music director for that. And there were like, I don't know, 20 odd composers. Everybody got their own little cue. It was very weird. And because there was no one composer composing throughout, Steven Spielberg didn't really have a way of really communicating with the composer, because it was all over, like 20, 30 guys out there writing cues. And again, being the Synclavir technologists that my partner and I were at the time, we were hired to do quick orchestral arrangements of the sketches. Like the composer would not do a full orchestration with every instrument. We do like a 6-line sketch with strings, woods, brass, concussion, you know, all this kind of stuff. It's like, there it is. And we were asked to quickly, with, you know, fake, with sampled orchestra, bang these things out.
Right. Almost
So
like
that-
almost like storyboarding audio.
Exactly. It was storyboarding audio so that it could be put up on the chem. Just as this, you know, an old Rube Goldberg type of machine, which is what everybody used to view things on film, because it was film. And so for about a month, we were churning out cues. We were working, you know, 18, 20-hour days, churning out cues, because in those days, and the musicians watching this now will probably never knew or may not have remembered. In those days, you could only play one note at a time on a sampler. It was not polyphonic. You couldn't play chords. And in fact, if you wanted to play legato with one note touching the next, you couldn't really do that, because the one note, the second note would cut off the first one.
Sheesh.
So it was a process. It was an automated process, but it took forever, where you play the notes in with a synthesizer sound that is polyphonic, transfer the sound to a sampled violin sound, for instance, and then the computer would make multiple passes onto audio tape, onto a 24-track tape, knowing what it had played the previous one.
Right. In order to
taking
layer
them all down, ticking them all off, and the final would say, okay, done. And you might have 12 tracks of violins that you then had to then bounce down to one.
Yeah.
And they do the process. So these things took forever to produce. And then, you know, we'd present them to Steven Spielberg, and, you know, and it would go through, and then he would accept or reject the cue, and then go back to the composer, and the composer would have to go and fix it, and we'd have to go back and do it all over again.
Oh man.
So it was a more of a technocrat job on that one, but
Right.
it was a really cool insight into the thought process of how Quincy envisioned that score, because it was something you don't really see done. I hadn't seen it before, and I really haven't seen it much since, where there was one guy sort of overseeing a whole bunch of other composers, and he was doling out cues, almost, you know, like, you'd be good for this, and you'd be good for that, and you'd be good for these 3 cues, and sort of like what a music supervisor does when he picks a whole slew of pop tunes and whatever, and drops them into a movie and selects them and creates a musical landscape that way. Here he was directing original music from, I think, 20 odd original composers.
That's cool. That's a cool way of thinking.
It was an
about
interesting concept. It was an interesting concept. So anyway, so that's what I did there. The David Bowie thing, I did a lot of work with Giorgio Moroder. And one of the first film I worked with Giorgio on was Cat People. And the song Putting Out the Fire with Gasoline was Bowie's song that we worked on
Nice.
together on that one. So, you know, in my early days, in the early 80s, early to middle 80s, you know, there was a lot of stuff that was going on where I was not writing the music, but working with other people. And it was, talk about an education.
Yeah.
You know, for Giorgio Moroder, I mean, I learned more from Giorgio about how to produce music, you know, how to see clearly where you want to go, what you want to get, and how to get there. That guy is, I mean, they're all geniuses, you know, him, Quincy, but I mean, Giorgio, who I've probably worked with the most of all the really sort of mega guys that I worked with in the early days, just unbelievable genius as to how he could see his way to what he wanted to do and how to get there. and how to produce things both efficiently and beautifully. I just have the utmost respect for him.
Yeah, seeing someone do something really is, I feel like, the most inspiring way to help yourself realize you could do it yourself.
Yeah.
Do you remember any, because they probably take a lot of explanation or maybe seeing it for yourself, but do you remember any of those kernels of wisdom that you learned from him while watching him, that as far as execution?
Yeah, I mean, we used to laugh about it, but he would come in the afternoon about 2 o'clock, and we were working in the morning or whatever until 2 in the morning. We were working, killer hours. And he'd come in from about 2 to 6, and he'd listen to everything, and he'd make his notes. He just likes it. This. I don't like this. This is great. Do more of that. This isn't working anymore. I just got some notes from the director, and they're changing the scene, so we need to go that way. And he just cut to the chase. There was no, well, let's try this maybe. Well, I don't know. Try it. He was like, boom, boom. And I think I think because he just lets go. He just goes, that's the answer, and just go do that. And
Decisiveness.
very decisive. And I think that's helped me a lot. And when I'm working, it's like, what's missing here? Okay, that's what's missing here. Go do that.
Right. It's funny. I was just talking about decisiveness yesterday with my fiance. We were watching some show about these guys who come in and they help people whose houses have basically become money pits. And I was like, what is the common thing that has caused this with all of these people who own these houses? They start these projects and then they find themselves in these messes. And it was like, none of them could make decisions, like just decide on something. And so they were just floundering, like you were saying, and then pushing themselves deeper and deeper into debt. And then these guys would come in and help them finish their house or whatever. But
and really what they're doing is they're giving up the decision-making to somebody else who has the confidence to say, well, I'm going to make a decision here.
Exactly.
And I think that was what I learned from Giorgio. And Giorgio has an amazing melodic sense. And I learned so much from him. And it was great.
So Brian, I feel like I could talk to you about your early days in music all day, because I would love it. But let's
talk about something that's happening now.
I know you're a busy guy. Before we talk about that, tell us a little bit about Ear to Ear Music, that you started in like 1992, and you just working with American Express, AT&T, Anheuser-Busch, Apple, BMW. I could go on, but because we have a lot of musicians who listen to this show, and a lot of people are interested in syncs nowadays. So love to hear, how that started and how that went.
Yeah. After all the working for other guys and learning how the other guys did it, started to get hired to write my own stuff. And I also like to do a lot of sound design at the time, my partner and I worked on Starman, for instance. We did all the orchestration for Jack Nietzsche, all the production for that. But we also, for the sound department, did some of the really special sound designy things that nobody in the sound department could really do, because we had machines that they didn't have. And we knew how to use them. And so I found myself gravitating toward commercials because they were in and out quick. I could do both music and at the time, sound design. Now it's bifurcated. The editors do that mostly. But, back then it was like I could do music and sound design and really create the entire sonic landscape for a given commercial. And I sort of just focused on that from 1992 when I started my own company. And again, happened to one of the clients that I had been working with prior, sort of really found their stride. They were a creative team, a writer and art director, found their creative stride. And having not worked for them for a couple of years because they changed agencies and whatever, they got their first Apple commercial campaign on broadcast. And I guess because they were newbies, the agency said, well, you're going to work with this composer, whatever, and it wasn't working out. And fortunately for me and my old partner, it's like, they said, well, can you, we know this guy, it's not working out, but there's these guys that we worked with before a couple of years ago, call them up. So from that, began an 8-year relationship doing all the Apple music for commercials. Then those two people, after about that 8 years, went over to a different ad agency and took over the IBM campaign. And for the next 13 years, and by the time I was solo, for the next 13 years, I did all the IBM advertising music.
Wow.
And it was great. They were the best creator team that I've ever worked with, a guy named Chris Wall and Susan Westra. They were just genius. And they worked with, the Steven Spielberg of advertising, Joe Pitka. He did almost all of their directing. And so I was fortunate to just fall into a creative, a creative situation that was just amazing. And we continue, we still, many of us are still working on the same as a team. It was an incredible thing. So I did a lot of, IBM, Apple. Yes, I've worked for, I've done for Mercedes and BMW and Ford. I mean, kind of just about every Fortune 500 company over the years.
Yeah,
I've
sounds
worked
like it.
And it's interesting because a lot of the music I did was underscorey. There wasn't, jingles have sort of fallen out of favor over the years. So there's not a lot of jingling except in toys, which we can get back to because I did a lot of toys too. My ugly dark secret.
Let's talk about toys. I love toys.
Well, it's a funny thing because, toys is the neglected ugly stepchild of advertising. Oh, you do toys. I do IBM. I do Mercedes. I do American Express. I mean, that's, I do Nike.
Yeah.
You do toys, but toys are huge. I mean,
toys are fun.
And not only are they fun, name me a bigger brand than Barbie. That's as memorable as M&M's or Coke.
Toys are what movies are made for sometimes,
Exactly. And so I did a lot of toys, and I had this one client, and all she did was toys. Her name was Margot Eldridge, and she was the absolute bomb for toys. So we worked together for 22, 23 years, and I did all of her music. We had a great working relationship until she decided to retire. And, in that period of time, and some of them with her, some of them I did just on my reputation. I had 2 Barbie campaigns, one for 2.5 years and one for 8.5 years. I launched the Bratz dolls and did all their music for the first 4 years. And did, music for Ariel, the Little Mermaid, and, all these different toys.
Huge.
So they were huge, and they were a lot of fun, and they were jingle based. And so it was the only place I got to really, on a regular basis, work with singers. And I love to work with singers. It's like my favorite thing to do is to work with singers. It's just so much fun. And I've always liked doing vocal arrangements, and I sing myself. And so I'd always end up in the background vocals because I just love to sing. And so I did a shit ton of toys.
Yeah.
And it taught me how to write music for both children and their parents, because if parents don't like it, they ain't going to buy it for the kid.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into what you've been up to lately. You've created this project called Out of the Books, which is geared towards children and their parents. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was sort of the outgrowth of working on all those toys with Margot. It was after that sort of vein of work sort of died out for me because, she was no longer doing it. And it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go chasing it. I wanted to do something for children that was maybe a little bit more enriching than selling them things.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, I have 2 daughters. They're, one's graduated college, the other one's graduating this year. but while they were in school, I would write songs for them and for their classrooms and bring them into the studio and have them record them. And, I'd give them CDs at the end or whatever, I did stuff like that and give little talks to their music classes and stuff. Try to be inspirational to the music. And so I was always working, along that way. And so I thought, well, what can I do that would be really fun for families? Because I really wanted to, not just kids. And so I started thinking about, what's great content, because I'm not a storyteller necessarily, but fairy tales are great content. And,
sure,
fairy tales are everywhere. Fairy tales have been used and abused in media for a very long time. Everything from all the stuff Disney has done to, every reimagination that's out there, that, DreamWorks and this, that, and the other thing, they're out there in droves. And one thing that I sort of felt is that a lot of these stories are being reimagined. They're changing the stories in order to tilt them to deliver a particular message, whether it's empowerment of one type or another, or to appease one small group of people, whatever that small group of people. They've been twisted and bent to find a target market.
Sure.
They've also been used as inspiration for other things that are much more loosely based. There was a movie a few years ago called The Passengers, where these people fly off into outer space on a 100-year journey, and they're in these pods where they have to sleep for 100 years before they get someplace, and then they can wake up, otherwise they'd be dead.
I saw that.
Yeah, you saw that, and somebody wakes up,
yeah,
because his thing is damaged, and then he wakes up the girl. Well,
yeah,
who else?
Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt was
and
Jennifer Lawrence.
Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah.
And but wait a minute.
Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping Beauty sleeps for 100 years.
I never thought about it that way.
And Jennifer Lawrence's character was named Aurora, which is the name of Sleeping Beauty.
Wow.
So no coincidence there.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So, you find it all over the place. So I wanted to go back to what the stories are.
Yeah.
And I gave myself a challenge. I said, I wonder if I can tell an entire story in a song. And the inspiration for that was this Danny Kaye movie from 1952 called Hans Christian Andersen, where he plays Hans Christian Andersen. And this is a film that was, when I was a little kid, well, it was already out before I was a little kid, but, it was a thing that was on TV and I'd see it. And, Hans Christian Andersen would go around town. He had his own problems, but whenever he'd bump into somebody, he'd find some excuse to tell them a story. And of course, being Danny Kaye, he sang them the stories, and the songs were written by Frank Lesser. They're genius. They're brilliant. And I remember that. I go, well, this hasn't been done since 1952. There must be room for some new songs that tell a whole fairy tale in the scope of one song. So I tried it out. I picked the poster child for all fairy tales, Cinderella, and said, okay, I'm going to just try one. So I wrote a song called If the Shoe Fits, Wear It. And it worked. I played it for some friends and friends with kids, and everybody seemed to like it. So I started on this journey of writing a bunch of these things. And I've worked with several co-writers along the way as well. And I've got, almost 20 of these things written. Most of the low-hanging fruit, not all the low-hanging, but most of the low-hanging fruit from Grimm's and Hans Christian Andersen, I've got those in the can, with plans to do lots more. But what I wanted to do, and what I'm very serious about doing, is staying to the story, because it's the stories, it's the real stories, the purity of the stories that has propelled them that has sustained them through the last 250 years.
Sure.
300 years.
Right.
500 years.
And it's almost how far you go back. It's almost, you talk about, the modifications that have been done, that those were, some of those are done just because, hey, maybe the old ones were, maybe you needed some new novelty, but it's almost novel to do the originals again.
Well, that's what I thought. It'd be novel to do the original, and whatever's original. Most of these, all the Grimm stuff is all oral. So, there's a million versions of these. And even the Grimms published 7 full volumes of their of their fairy tales, and each volume is different than the previous one here or there. So they kept editing them down. Anyway, so I would go back, I'd read 4 or 5 different translations of any given fairy tale to try to find something so I could sort of say, well, that's really where the fairy tale is coming from. And then try to make it into a song. And of course, to tell a whole fairy tale in 4 or 5 minutes, you do have to abridge it a little bit.
Yeah.
But what I tried to do was cut things out that weren't important to the story, and that didn't change the story or didn't change the message or didn't change the moral or change who the characters were in relation to the other characters. Just take it out. And so, and I think I've done that. And so I have these what I call story songs, that each one tells an entire fairy tale. Rumpelstiltskin, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, all of them. So then it's like, well, what do you do with all this? Well, there's the record, and there's a record out. It's out there on iTunes and all your wherever you want to stream
everything
from,
out on
Spotify,
everything.
it's out there. But everybody wants visual content and delivery of various sorts. And so I thought it'd be really fun to take a few of these songs and put them in a 1-hour play, musical theater piece. I was inspired to do this at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which happens every year in August in Edinburgh. It takes over the entire city for a month. And it's a fantastic thing. If you've never been, or some of the audience will certainly have been, it's the largest arts festival in the world. And I was going to do a run of that. I had it all. I worked with my co-writer, Erica M. And we put this play together, a 1-hour musical for families.
Yeah.
It was going to run the full length of Edinburgh last year. And then there was this little virus that kind of got in the way. So what do? Well, I cried for a day. And then my wife, Sarah, said to me, why don't you do something online? I'm sure you've got this great story. Why don't you do something online with this thing?
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So I thought about it for a minute and a half or an hour or a day. And I called Erica and I said, hey, what do you think we tweak the script a little bit and turn this into a episodic or some sort of something for YouTube?
Yeah.
And she was like, really? What? And then she thought about it for a day and said, yeah, absolutely. Let's do this. So we tweaked the script. I already had a director. And we already had a couple people in the cast. It's a cast of 9. And so now we're in COVIDia. Now what do we do? Okay, so Erica and I are busy tweaking the script and talking to our director. Now we got to get this thing cast. And most of our actors were UK based. I used to live in the UK with my family. We raised our children in the UK. I'm back here in LA now with my wife, but we go back and forth a lot. My kids live in London. So I had a lot of UK based talent connections there. And it was originally supposed to be in Edinburgh anyway. So that was, and my director is based in Liverpool. So we start getting, he says, well, call this person, I'll call that person. And my daughter, who is one of the actresses, cause she's a musical theater actress, aspiring, had a couple of her friends. And so we're putting this cast together. And one of the lovely, silver lining of COVID, the West End is shut down. Everybody's out of work. And my director caught wind of, he knew this one young actor who was in Hamilton on the West End.
Wow.
And he said, this guy's in Hamilton, but I think he's out of work. And, he's a really good little actor. I've worked with him before on other things, and he's really good. You should call him up. And so he paved the way, made a little intro. And so I call this guy up. His name is Carl Spencer. And you want to do this? I sent him the script. He goes, yeah, this will be fun. Let's do this, And so I had him, and he plays a fairly major role. I mean, he plays John Laurens in the first act, and he plays Hamilton's son in the second act. It's a split role. And I was still short of male actors. I needed one more guy. And I said, hey, you got any buddies? You got any guys that you think might be into this?
I bet.
And he said, yeah, I got a friend who might be into it. I'll ask him. I'll send in. I said, go ahead and send in the script. Just tell him not to shoot it around. And he says, yeah, call this guy, Carl Queensborough, another Carl. So I call this guy, Carl Queensborough. I go, Carl Spencer said, I should call you. You might be interested in doing it. I said, yeah, this looks great. It'd be a lot of fun. Let's do it. Then I find out Carl Queensborough is Hamilton.
Awesome.
I didn't find that out until about 2 weeks later.
Amazing.
So, you know, the silver lining of COVID, and I have an, you know, I have other people, you know, one who has her own theater company and one who's also been a lead on the West End in another play. I mean, I've got some really skilled talent out there. And then some young talent. I got my daughter and one of her friends, you know, somebody else that I knew that was a great singer and actress that I've known who's not even doing it, but she was available and I thought perfect for the role. And, you know, and so we have a range of from student actors to on the West End starring. And so we put this thing together and we directed the whole. So here we are. I want to do live action with costumes. It's out of the books is a band that lives inside fairy tale land, the land of once upon a time. And they're all 2D characters. And so they're all drawn, but I didn't have time or money to animate this thing. So we did this live action, but against drawn backgrounds. And my illustrator, Emily Carew Woodard, had done the backgrounds. And then my other daughter, Charlotte, who is a fashion designer and did all the costumes out of paper because it's all flat paper books. And so we mailed out all the costumes. We mailed out green screens to everybody. We mailed out special little microphones that plug into their iPhones, and everybody shot this local in their own bedrooms during the COVID lockdown, all over from Northern England to here in Los Angeles, being directed over Zoom with me in Los Angeles, my director in Liverpool, my writer in Toronto. And we're doing all these shoots. And then I sent it all to my post-production, started off in New York, and then due to conflicts in schedule, moved to another company in London. So, I mean, everything was all over the place. And we came up with this wonderful 7-episode show that you can watch it down in about an hour, a little over an hour. I've got a little playlist on the Out of the Books YouTube channel. And it's a story that basically glues a bunch of these songs together. And it's all about how in the modern world, people really aren't reading anymore and they're losing their values, which is, you know, a lot of the things that we talk about in society today. It's like people are forgetting what's important. And I think actually COVID has helped people realize what's important because they've been back with their families. They've had a smaller, more concise life. But up until then, it was like people forgetting about a lot of these things. And so, you know, the land of once upon a time is being forgotten. And the treasury of tales, which is like the Library of Congress, is starting to crumble because it doesn't have the energy of the human, you know, feeding off these stories. Yeah. So the librarian, who is our sort of Yoda, Mary Poppins in the story, she decides she remembers all of her fairy tales because she remembers every fairy tale in the world that's ever been written, but she sings them to herself because, as we were saying earlier, singing songs is the best way to remember something.
Yeah.
So she decides that she's going to have a singing competition, and she puts out the word that there's going to be a singing competition to find the best singer in the land to go out and into the real world and reinvigorate people's love of fairy tales and culture and society and all these sorts of things. And so what we end up with is an X Factor, American Idol, America's Got Talent kind of a talent show where various ne'er-do-well fairy tale characters that you've never heard of are competing to be the voice of the land of Once Upon a Time.
Ah, that's a fun way to tie it all together. It's cool when you have, I was watching a documentary recently on Nightmare Before Christmas, a musical.
Great show.
Yeah,
Great show.
and yeah, and they were saying basically, what's his name? Used to be a pop singer, or
Danny
new wave.
Elfman.
Yeah, Danny Elfman. He basically wrote all the songs first, and then they built the movie around it. And that's kind of what you've done here. You had all the songs, and then you built the larger story around it. But Brian, you seem to be incredibly good at utilizing what you know, where you are, and then just using that to go to the next place in your life. You're working at a piano store. You meet some people into synthesizers, you start working for synthesizers, you're selling to the right people, use your knowledge of the synthesizer to start working with these amazing producers. And then, and I noticed you go from Apple to, back then, IBM and Apple, IBM was synonymous with PC. So it was basically, It was like IBM versus Apple.
Was versus.
Yeah. And then, so you're like, hey, I did it for Apple. Maybe I could do it for you guys. And then you do Barbie. And then you probably did the same thing with Bratz, where you're like, hey, I did it for Barbie. I can do it for you guys. And then, and are you a big kid at heart? Because I feel like you light up a little bit when you talk about toys. And I love, accessing that part of myself as well. That's why I'm like, hey, let's talk about toys. But you're doing toys, and now you're creating musicals, which are based in fairy tales. Is that part of the motivation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that music. Okay, I'm not as young as I once was, but music does a whole lot to keep you young and keep you in touch with what's out there, and what people are listening to, what people are thinking, what people are feeling. And yeah, I am a big kid. My wife would probably say I'm an old curmudgeon, but that's a different thing. But I do. I like to play, and I like to joke around, and I like the energy that I get from music. And when I hear something that is new that I wasn't aware of before, just listening on Spotify, and a playlist takes me someplace, or somebody says, oh, you got to go listen to this. Or actually, I listened to a couple of the artists that were on some of your other Bring It Backwards.
Yeah.
I go, oh, well, that person sounds interesting. Let me go listen to this. And totally. It was like, oh, yeah, I like that. So wherever it comes from, I guess the advantage of age is that I can look back now and say, this is how stuff happens. And this is how you have to always let yourself be open to the next thing. Cause you just, what was it John Lennon said? Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans.
Yeah.
That's life. That's my motto. Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And you have to know that. And I think that, when I was young, I had certain visions as to what the career of a musician should be. When I was in college, if you weren't a player, you were nothing. If you were a composer in college, it was because you weren't good enough to play well. And it was all the other guys and girls that weren't very, very good. Now, some of them have turned out to be remarkable composers, 30 years, 40 years later.
Right.
Or even, right out of the box, to pursue that career. But the perception was the good ones were the players.
Right. Right.
My perception got changed as I got exposed to more and more things. And
once you're getting in the studio with Quincy Jones and everything, you're like, wait a second, maybe these are the big boys.
Yeah. It's like, I wanted to be a rock star. And I realized that my calling really to be a studio musician, because I like to produce, I like to be in charge of a whole lot of things. And maybe I don't want to necessarily be on stage as badly as I want to play with all the toys. I like playing with toys. That's why synthesizers are so much fun.
Yeah, they very much are like toys. Definitely. Yeah. Well, Brian, you've had an incredible career, man. Congratulations on all your success and an epic life so far. So I'm sure you would have some great wisdom. You've already bestowed some a mountain of it on us. But if you had one piece of advice for aspiring artists, what would it be?
Whoa. Don't probably not to be so single-minded as to exclude other possibilities that come your way. I realize that some artists have become great artists because they were only single-minded, and I'm not going to say, if you really got it and you really believe what you've got is the shit, then don't be distracted. But if you just love music and you want to find your way in music, talk to as many people as you can talk to, find as many outlets as you can find, and let yourself be open to what happens next. If you are a committed artist and you think you've got, if you're the next Beatles or the next Lady Gaga or the next Michael Jackson or the next, whomsoever you want to name, if you've really got that kind of a vision and you want to be there, do that and keep your blinders on. And I wish you the best, knowing that you talk about the 1%ers. This is the 1,000th of 1%ers that make it to be Ed Sheeran, to be Kanye West, to be, that's the 1,000th of 1%. It's the hardest thing in the world to be a star.
But even Kanye, he's doing a million things.
He's doing a million things. He's got his fashion and all of his other things. There's, you just got to keep your ears open. You just got to keep letting yourself be open to what, because it may end up being something that you weren't expecting, that you even enjoyed more.
Yeah.
And, so I would just say that.
That's great advice. And I think you are the exemplary person to give that advice, because I was just about to say, it seems like you have went with the flow, obviously with a lot of hard work behind it, but you've just been going through the river of the music industry and just sailing and having a great time and doing a lot of legendary things because you kept your mind open. Bringing it backward.